Why do Catholics have a pope? One of the most distinguishing factors of being a Catholic is that you recognize the authority of the pope. Virtually every other Christian denomination doesn't believe in the pope. Even the Orthodox, who are so similar to Roman Catholics in just about everything, our main area of difference, they don't believe in the authority of the pope. So why do the Catholics believe in needing a pope? Well, as many things in Catholicism, right, it's rooted in Jesus and also in the Old Testament, right? So, first of all, who was the first pope? It was St. Peter, right, the first of the apostles, right? Jesus, in the Gospel of Matthew, he says, Peter, I'm changing your name. Your name was Simon. I'm changing it to Peter, which means rock. And upon this rock, I will build my church, right? So Jesus gives him this authority. And you can see it throughout the New Testament. Peter is one of the main apostles, always following Jesus around, right? Jesus, after he rises from the dead, he tells Peter to look after his flock, right? All sorts of connections that you can tell that Peter has this sort of supreme authority among the apostles. Not that he was perfect, not that he was sinless, of course not. He abandoned Jesus at the cross. And yet, Christ gave him a specific authority, right? And Catholics believe that every successor of Peter down throughout the ages has that same authority, and he's called the Pope. Now, why would the Catholics think this, besides the fact that so many of the early Christians believe this as well? Why do we still believe it today? Well, it's not just rooted in Jesus, but like so many things in Catholicism, it's actually rooted in the Old Testament as well. Always remember that. When you think that Catholics do weird stuff, oftentimes it's rooted in the Old Testament. So, if you have any familiar with Christianity and in the Bible, right, and some of the prophecies from the Old Testament, a lot of people are familiar with the fact that Jesus was prophesied about before he ever came, and in the Old Testament. And one of the most famous prophecies about Jesus is that he would be a descendant of David. Remember David? King David, who wrote most of the Psalms, King David who killed the giant Goliath. King David was famous for being one of the greatest kings of Israel. And in the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 7, God made a specific promise to David. And he told David that one of his descendants later on, God would raise up. And he would be called a son of God. And his reign would last forever. It would never end. Right? So when Jesus was born, for example, when the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary, he told Mary that Jesus would take up the throne of David, right? His ancestor, right? So Jesus is that descendant of David. But if you read the Bible carefully, it's not just about Jesus, it's about the kingdom, right? The kingdom of God. That kingdom of God comes from the Old Testament, from the kingdom of David. And guess what? The kingdom of David looked a lot like the Catholic Church. Right? So, for example, in the kingdom of David, there was always a queen of the kingdom. And who was the queen? It wasn't his wife. It was the king's mother. Part of the reason why it was the king's mother is because a lot of times the kings had multiple wives. You know, it's kind of an issue for a different day. But so there's only one mother of the king. So she was always the queen. As Catholics, we say that Jesus is the king of the universe. And who's the queen? His mother, Mary. Just as it is described in the book of Revelation, right? The woman clothed with the sun. So Mary is the queen of the kingdom. But there was more to the kingdom of David. The kingdom of David, in his court, he had 12 representatives of the 12 tribes of Israel, sometimes called the 12 ambassadors. Jesus in his kingdom likewise has 12 ambassadors, right? We call them the 12 apostles, the 12 disciples, right? In the kingdom of David, moreover, right, there was a priesthood. There was a hierarchical priesthood. It had 3 levels. It was the high priest, and then the other descendants of Aaron, which were the priests who would offer sacrifice. And then there was the rest of the Levites, who basically assisted the priests in offering their sacrifice. In the Catholic Church, again, we have a very similar structure. We have bishops, and then we have priests who offer the sacrifice of the Mass, and then the deacons who assist the priests in those sacrifices. Now, here's where it comes to the Pope, and this is really cool, something a lot of people don't realize. The book of Isaiah, chapter 22, it mentions another person in the kingdom of David, which scholars often call the prime minister. Literally in Hebrew, the word is the over the house, right? The over the house. And you can read about it in Isaiah 22. There's this person named Eliakim, who is the prime minister. And as he is described, right, he's described as being in charge of liturgical vessels, right? So he's basically described as a priest. He's called the Holy Father, right? Which is one of the things Catholics call the Pope, the Holy Father, right? And guess what the symbol of his authority was? He walked around with the keys of the kingdom. And you can read about that right there in Isaiah 22, right? When Jesus gave the keys of the kingdom to Peter, right, it was reminiscing back to that role of the kingdom of David, the prime minister, who whenever the king was absent, whenever he was gone, the prime minister was the first in charge in his absence. What do Catholics believe about the Pope? That's basically what we believe. That Jesus is the king, he's truly in charge, but after he ascended into heaven, he entrusted his reign to somebody else, right? The Pope is the vicar of Christ, literally the person who rules in his place while he's in heaven. He is Christ's representative here on earth, right? That's why we believe the Pope is so important. It doesn't mean that everything the Pope says is 100% correct, like every interview he gives or every essay he writes, right? The authority is actually very limited, which we believe as Catholics, which we could talk about a different time. But we have a Pope for a reason. We have a Pope because in the Old Testament, there was a prime minister. And Jesus alluded to that in the Gospel of Matthew. And he says, I'm going to build my church upon you. I'm going to give you the keys, right? That same authority of the prime minister of the Old Testament. That's why we have a Pope as Catholics.